Good morning. Welcome back to Daybreak on this second day of June 2020. It's now 25 minutes to 7 o'clock, and it's time to speak to Johanna Leblanc, who is a legal analyst in matters national security as well as foreign affairs. She's in Washington, D.C. I still struggle how to salute you. Good night.
Good evening to you.
All right.
I'm sorry, good morning to you. Good morning to you.
Yeah, it's good morning for us. And thank you so much for joining us this morning or your evening on your side. And let's begin by speaking about the situation you find your country now in, specifically with the coronavirus cases. Now that we know that more than, I believe, 1.7 million people have tested positive of the virus. And of course, out of the total tests, we are reporting about 17.7. Actually, 1.8 million have tested positive. 17.7 million people have been tested. What would you describe the status of the fight against the coronavirus as in the several states that are in the U.S.?
I think first and foremost, the U.S. is making some strides in containing the violence by putting together specific measures, right? Such as wearing the face mask and limiting our interactions with each other. But what we're seeing is, although the numbers may have gone down in major cities across the United States, but what we're seeing now is that in rural America, the numbers are going up in places where people do very low entry type of job, like working in the plant factory or working in different facilities that requires the constant interaction with other individuals. Mm-hmm. So that's where the problem really lies right now.
Right, and we've seen states starting to reopen. Of course, we've seen some situations in South Korea of learners going back to school, but more cases of coronavirus are reported, and therefore they have to close down. What is the status in reopening and returning to normalcy in the several states?
So in a lot of states, they have different phases. So some states have what you call phase one, which is, limited operation. Non-essential businesses still remain unopened, but there are some states where non-essential businesses are now open, like your nail salons and so forth. But for here in the District of Columbia, our nail shops have not reopened, and so many our restaurants haven't fully reopened yet either. Mm-hmm. When it comes to phase one, even employers, what they realized during the pandemic is that some of their employees can actually work remotely and be, relatively efficient and effective. Right. So a lot of employers are kind of like slow to allow everybody to return back to work.
Right, and now, even amidst the war, we've seen President Donald Trump making good his threat. Earlier on, I believe it was in April, he had indicated that he was going to terminate the relationship with WHO. Now he has announced that he's formally withdrawing from it. How has this news been received, and especially by the lawmakers there?
Well, first and foremost, looking at this matter purely from a legal perspective, the United States Congress passed a joint resolution back in 1948. That one requires that the President of the United States gives the World Health Organization 1 year prior to withdrawal, right? So the United States can withdraw from the organization, but a 1 year notice is required. And two, you must pay all of your financial obligations. And as we know, the United States is in arrears. So what I think is going to happen next is, well, first and foremost, we don't even know whether or not the President of the United States has officially informed the leadership of the organization of this decision. We saw the tweets and so on. So that's the first step. And second, I could imagine that if the president does not adhere to the joint resolution of 1948, that there will be potential litigation from Congress against the President of the United States.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether you've been able to look at the law that U.S. ratified to be in a position to join the WHO. I know it allows the U.S. can choose to be in the WHO or not, but how is the process like of withdrawing that now the president needs to follow until that position is achieved?
Well, the charter interesting because I've read the charter a number of times to really analyze this matter from a legal perspective. And unfortunately, the charter itself is not clear as to what should happen when a country wants to exit, right? And which is why the United States Congress did adopt this resolution. And also, I think what's important here is that many countries are fighting for membership on this organization, to be a part of this organization. Countries like Taiwan, for example, has been lobbying for a very long time. And in fact, the United States was lobbying for Taiwan, asking leaders of other states to support Taiwan becoming a member. So it's really interesting. But another point I would like to make is that ultimately withdrawing from the World Health Organization, I think, the president said that the funds will be allocated to other multilateral organizations. So the work will ultimately still be done. But what I'm concerned about from a policy standpoint is the reality that there is a trade war between the United States and China. So as the United States is making these types of decisions, China is gaining global dominance, right? So from a strategic position, I don't think the decision to withdraw from the World Health Organization, whether it be today or a year from today, is the right move for the United States, because the U.S. wants to maintain its global dominance as the most powerful empire in the world.
And Johanna, we've seen some European nations agreeing with President Trump that yes, there are certain things that need to be changed at the WHO. There are certain reforms that need to be enacted. How much of support has the president received from especially the Congress in pursuit of this desire of the Americans?
Yeah, I think Congress has also echoed that sentiment, that there are some structural challenges within the organization that should be addressed, right? And as member states, you have the right collectively to create the norms and the procedures of how the organization will conduct itself. So the United States had a very interesting, a very key role in setting up the standards. And I thought it was also interesting that the president made this announcement when after the letter was sent to the organization asking the leadership to make certain corrections and certain provisions. The letter said 30 days, but this decision came in less than 30 days. So that was interesting.
And obviously, the funding of the U.S. to the WHO, we're talking about nearly 45 billion shillings. That's about $450 million. And now if that is taken away, it will affect some programs that the WHO gets to implement. What do you think would be the immediate source of such kind of money for WHO moving forward?
I think moving forward, I think you're going to see China's leadership will be on the rise. Obviously, because China is the second largest donor, and we have seen since this pandemic, China has really been strengthening its bilateral relations with governments throughout the African continent. Because one thing people will never forget is who was there for me when I was in crisis. And right now we are in crisis mode. We are in panic mode, and the world needs as much resources as possible. But Sam, the reality is that the president did say that the funds will be allocated to other multinational organizations. So I think the continent of Africa and other low and middle income countries will ultimately still get the aid and the assistance that they desperately need, especially when it comes to fighting against global pandemics such as COVID-19.
All right. Of course, that conversation continues. We'll sure be looking forward to see what happens moving forward. But let's now talk about the situation you're facing right now. Amidst the coronavirus pandemic, we are seeing people breaching the social distancing protocols that have been announced in several states. And the reason is they're protesting the, should I say, killing or the death of George Floyd. How much of anger would you say you've seen compared to other protests that you've seen before of what now has become the tag of Black Lives Matter?
Well, Sam, the reality is that people are not just protesting for justice as it relates to the death of George Floyd. People are fighting against systemic injustice in America that has been around for decades. In fact, it has been around since the first slave came to American shores in 1619. It was roughly 20 slaves came to the colony of Virginia, and America had not been formed at that time. So, but for the sweats and the exploitation and the killings of Black slaves from the African continent, America would not be the country that it is today. And I think ultimately people of color are fighting for their fair shot of the pie. And another thing is that, you know, we're not talking about an isolated incident, this white man is racist or this white woman is racist. We are talking about laws that are put in place for the purpose of strategically discriminating against people of color. For example, when it comes to wealth, one of the quickest ways to build wealth in America is by home buying. And the studies show that, and this is a study that came from the United States Senate Joint Economic Committee. And it says that, and listen carefully, roughly 45% of Black Americans own their homes in comparison to 72% of white Americans. And when it comes to wealth, Black Americans have $17,000 in wealth in comparison to $171,000 US dollars for white Americans. And the numbers go on and go on. So fundamentally, people are fighting for systemic changes in America.
Systemic changes, you call them, but we've seen the president speaking against, of course, what now is becoming violence, and he's sort of calling for the authorities to be in a position to contain this. What would you rate, how would you rate the president's response amidst, yes, what would be genuine protest, but now getting into the violence corner?
Well, what I can say is, people have the right to protest, and you can protest all day as much as you want to, because especially in a place like America and so many other places all over the world, in order to get justice, sometimes you have to protest and you have to fight. But what has been happening with these protests is that they have been infiltrated by foreign actors, I believe so, and by other people who have different agenda. Because right now, America is at its weakest moment. We are in the middle of a crisis, even though it may not seem like it today. Roughly 40 million people in America are unemployed. So America is at its lowest, one of its lowest points in a very long time. So there are people who are taking advantage of America's weaknesses and utilizing this moment when people are protesting for a very valid and legitimate cause, but infiltrating it to cause ruckus, to burn down institutions, to burn down properties, and so on. So the president's response, while I think that as a leader, you have a duty to respond to some of these national crises, but the president said that he will involve the military and in different states if the governors don't act accordingly. But I think Mr. President sometimes forget that we have a constitution and there is separation of powers. So the president can't do what he wants to do when he wants to do. Governors have inherent powers that are provided to them in the Constitution as well.
Right, and of course we have been observing the protests and even hearing some Kenyan chants there, people saying haki yetu. There's a tweet that came from a man from here in Kenya by the name Alex Ndirito saying that people should ban the White House. Have you seen it, and how much of a concern is it to people in America?
I have not seen that tweet, but that is very alarming, because I think this type of message does not advance the cause. When you're trying to effect change in America, burning down institutions is not the right way to go about it. And anybody who's engaged in such acts should be arrested accordingly. I don't care who you are, because it impacts the health and security of everyone. But more importantly, I think that when we're talking about fighting for injustice, we have to be strategic, and I think people need to take their emotions out of it. One of the things that I've learned throughout my career so far is control your emotions, because when your emotions are involved, oftentimes you don't make the right decisions. So right now, what I think is important is that money talks in America and anywhere else in the world, and the Black community has the buying power. Black Americans are the #1 spenders in this country. If Black Americans will just buckle up and not spend a dime for a while, and keep their hard-earned dollars and purchase from Black-owned businesses and not support some of these institutions that have played a role in the oppression and suppression of Black people in America, we can see some of these laws change in America.
All right, and Johanna, as you wind up, so this fight, I mean, the racial tensions have been there for so long now, and one would imagine that America, having been a democratic model for the rest of the world, would have overcome such kind of situations. What do you think will be the solution, even as we approach an election in the coming months?
You know, first and foremost, you know, as an immigrant from the Republic of Haiti, living in America now, I'm a U.S. citizen. What I can tell you is that I've had opportunities that I know I would not have had in my country because of my socioeconomic status. In America, you know, when they say it's the land of opportunities and so on, that still exists. America has made significant strides, and people of color have reached political status in America. They have reached a certain level of social mobility. They have attained higher education. In fact, Black women in America are some of the most educated people in this country, but yet because of gender discrimination and racism, we are the most underpaid, unfortunately. So these are the issues that we're dealing with. You know, I think to address this, there needs to be structural changes. The entire system, to a certain extent, should be dismantled and start all over again to ensure that everybody, whether you're Black, whether you're white, whether you're poor, whether you're gay, whether you're disabled, because the system is not just not working for Black people, it's not working for white people either. Right. But I think some in our society have told them that you may be poor, but guess what, you're white, so your problems are not as bad. When in reality, white Americans are suffering like no other in this country. In fact, in the year 2020, if a child were to be born in poverty, that child is less likely than ever before in this country to die in poverty. That is unacceptable. America, the free land, the America that I know, we can do so much better.
All right. Thank you so much, Johanna, for speaking to us this morning to give us perspectives on some of those things that you've been able to observe from this other side of the world. Now it's time that I need to wish you a good night.
Asante. What's the other word, please?
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Johanna Leblanc is a legal analyst in matters to do with national security as well as foreign affairs. We now take a short break. On return, we'll be speaking to Senator Isaac Mwaura, who we understand has been running for the position of Senate Deputy Speaker. But understandably, there could be some news. We speak to him in a short while. We're back in a moment.